You have heard this quote from Dogen Zenji's Genjokoan before. To study Buddhism is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be verified by all things. To be verified by all things is to drop off the body and mind of self and to drop off the body and mind of others. No trace of enlightenment remains, and this no trace continues forever. Our practice is to sit, of course, but when we first begin, the rest of our life mostly remains much the same. Nevertheless, Dogen doesn't start this section on the changes that take place in practice with to study Buddhism is to meditate, but with to study Buddhism is to study the self, which might be also surprising. We know from reading and or listening to Dharma talks that a main point of Buddhism is that everything changes. If so, no matter how we have thought about having a self in the past, no one thing or one can be said to have a self. This might make us wonder why Dogen says that we should be studying having a self then. After all, our experience prior to knowing about sitting, much as our culture telling us that we should love ourselves and put ourselves first, after all, our experience prior to knowing about sitting, much as our culture telling us that we should love ourselves and put ourselves first, could make it likely for us not to agree with Buddha's insight that we don't have a permanent self. Dogen Zenji next says that to study the self is to forget the self. In that we cannot forget something without having something to forget, it follows that we must first identify what this self is to us. Meditation, and being able to be done alone, seems sufficient in itself. But we need to do more than sit if we are to investigate this self. We have to see the problems that occur because we believe in it. In other words, our practice entails both sitting and beginning to be aware of what is happening elsewhere in our life. What we should examine in particular is how our thinking affects us. In thinking that we have a self, what we find is that the karma that we create in taking care of ourselves first is the main cause of our suffering. The precepts are helpful in identifying this. Being aware of them, we notice the bad effect not following them per se, but instead doing the things that we want to do, such as indulging our likes and dislikes. This is studying the self. And the result of our doing this is to stop taking the self seriously by paying attention to it. It is not a matter of getting rid of the self so much as of the self mattering less to us. Those in a relationship may experience having few and unspoken demands, not having what they want, not bothering them so much. We may even wonder at why believing in the self made sense to us before. This newfound indifference to making sure that we get our way is to forget the self. Dogen follows this with, to forget the self is to be verified by all things. What comes to our attention more when focusing less on caring for ourselves is the problems of others. Rather than still hoping that others can help us, though grateful when they do, we find ourselves desiring to help them. This is what is meant by to be verified by all things. We are not defined by what we do, but by what there is to be done for others. Once clearly outside of us, our world has become instead who we are. What we care about most is giving others what has been given to us, our practice, for example, but not because we are happy to share it, as that would entail having a desire to keep a part of what we have for ourselves. Dogen continues with, to be verified by all things is to drop off the body and mind of self and other. And to drop off the body and mind of self, and to drop off the body and mind of self and others. While being unfazed by the demands of the ego's self is the same as to drop off the body and mind of self, we are still being verified by all things and doing what needs to be done in taking care of our world. Rather, not free of it, as if our world were an external self, we have yet to drop off the body and mind of others. We can see the self in, quote, ourself, unquote, from the other, our, we can see the self in ourself from the our in it. We don't say self, we say ourself. However, in coming to realize that those in our world also have Buddha nature, leads us to recognize that they, like our world itself, are as equally empty of self as we are. Ceasing to be attached to our world and to those in it is to drop off the body and mind of others. We still look after people, but is now due to the interdependence of everyone and everything else. We are just us, and they are just them. But we are also endlessly defining each other. We take care of them as they take care of us. They take care of us as we take care of them. Nothing could be more natural. Dogen ends his analysis of the changes in our practice with, no trace of enlightenment remains, and this no trace continues forever. I'll do that one again. No trace of enlightenment remains, and this no trace continues forever. If humans lived only in the dark, not only would a word for day not exist, but a word for night wouldn't either. It follows that there is no emptiness anywhere when we and everything are empty. Likewise, everyone and thing being empty is the same as everyone and thing being enlightened. As such, no one thing is enlightened either. Indeed, one is said to have, quote, the stink of enlightenment, unquote, when holding on to some special experience. Rinzai teacher Ikkyu put it this way: I don't remember making a mistake called enlightenment. Suzuki Roshi simply said, no trace of enlightenment remains because there is no subjectivity or objectivity in our enlightenment. That is, Such differentiation of inside and outside must take place in the world of consciousness, which is the opposite of emptiness. The last of the 10 ox herding pictures that Mike Martin referred to recently provides an example of this no trace of enlightenment continues forever. In a picture, an old person carrying a sack has returned from a lifetime of practice in the mountains and is talking to children as to equals. What is in the sack isn't personal belongings, but presents for everyone, including the kids, much as a grandparent's suitcase might be. Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? Jane is here.
Right.
Trying to get her closer than I'll back up. Here it goes. Okay, yes. Mark, did you have your hand up there or any? No? Okay. Yes, Matt.
Yeah. So are you saying that what happens is that ultimately the helping is no longer done out of desire, it's just inclination? To assist others is just inclination. There's no real intent. It just happens because, as you stated, it's natural, or as I seem to recall you stated, it's natural.
Yes, I did say it's natural. Nothing could be more natural. Yeah, that's very good. And you actually added something that I hadn't added, but now when I'm saying those words, I've forgotten what that was that you added. But
inclination.
Oh, yeah, desire changes to inclination. That was very good, actually. So the desire to help others is still desire.
It's something I read,
Yes.
so
Well,
I can't take credit.
well, that person that wrote that was very insightful.
And I've heard it said that helping others at a certain point in your practice is not a special action. It's doing what a wind bowl does. It rings. It's just what you do.
Yeah, actually,
Thank you.
I said we are we are just. Well, I can't remember what I said here. Yeah, okay. We are just us, and they are just them, and we just help. No more to it than that. That's
what
just
we do.
what happened. That's what Jen was just saying. Yeah, yeah. Like the wind bell ringing. Isn't that secure? She said that.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Anyone else? I'm question hungry when desire comes up. Yes, Rachel, and then Mark. Rachel, go first.
Then I would suspect the person whose inclination to help others would include that if one helps others and it goes awry, it's neither appreciated or perhaps even goes truly awry. That same ability to naturally respond to what's needed would include not necessarily pleasure or displeasure if that effort, did not, the outcome did not match the action. Like that one story, I don't recall now who it was, but the monk who was handed a child because the woman had said he was the father, and he took the child, and then a few years later, she fessed up that in fact he wasn't the father and wanted the child back. He said so, and he had taken care of the child, and then he returned the child. Is it in that same?
I think so, yes. Yeah, that's in the same, that's within the same kind of thing, yeah. I'm not certain about it either. It might have been EQ, where I brought up, I love that phrase, by the way. I don't remember having made a mistake called enlightenment. Let's see, EQ is super famous, a Rinzai teacher. I mean, the famous part is super famous, yeah. But so he's very well known.
Peter, I think it was Hakuin.
Was it Hakuin? Okay, good, thank you. I one of the two. Okay, I'll correct and say Hakuin. I actually tell the story usually with Hakuin actually, so I have no idea which one is correct, but I'll take that as word. So from now on, it'll be Hakuin.
Don't do that.
Why not? Mark?
Thank you. This is very nice talk, Peter.
Okay.
It's really graceful in a lot of ways that really counterpoints, I think, how we can in the West here now, like, be very concerned about changing everything, changing the world, changing our minds, changing the way society works, changing us being on these dangerous courses of climate change and everything else. And it's rather just how remarkable just stopping this in the tracks, these thoughts, these things like this, and how once getting enlightened, it's really, there's still nothing there. It's still just us being, let's say, more group minded and just caring for others and others caring for us, and a great, wonderful symbiotic relationship begins with the whole world.
Okay.
And this, what you're saying really points that out.
Well, thank you. I would not use the phrase. I like you use two phrases. I would choose the second one over. We become more group minded, because that's another self.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
It's a very, very strong one. It's the self that causes wars, or goes along with wars, et cetera, or goes along with all kind of stuff. So it's the group can be very selfish.
You're right, but then the group can be very unselfish too, and it can really support all the members and support the group. As the smaller the group, perhaps the more selfish it gets. The larger the group, the more it must give up all the, let's say, the smaller prejudices and thought processes that the small group might maintain. Although, most of the Buddhist groups I've been in have been pretty small, but I find their mindset is usually quite large.
Yeah, but that's how Buddhism spreads. It depends, actually. Of course, China was very different. China had huge monasteries at various times. Thousands of people in one monastery.
And yet it couldn't last, could it?
No, then the Tibetans came down, but they were forced into exile, and the Buddhists monastic Buddhists set up various places, not just in the north, but in the south, and now they have very, very large temples also. I mean, thousands of people, apparently. Remember the guy who was here 3 or 4 years ago? Yeah, he was raising money for his local orphanage. He wanted to build 6 more rooms or something, and we made a donation to it. He's a very nice man, but he was a teacher, he was a teacher at one of those huge monasteries, like an American, not American universities, of course, 50,000, but yeah. Anyway, thank you, Mark. Thank you. Mike, I can't get by without listening to your voice. What are you going to tell me?
all I can do is repeat myself, and I'm getting kind of worried about that's all I've got left. I don't have any more original thoughts, but I think it boils down to when you're saying dropping off your body and mind, it goes back to the same old thing. You're in the moment. If you're in the absolute moment, which can't be measured, and you're not thinking about the past or the future, you will do what is needed to be done without thinking about gain or threat. And that it seems like with meditation, and especially with your talk, like I've said a billion times, be here now. It's just that attitude of you're not looking for gain, you're not worried, you're not stressed, you're not, you're right in the moment. And when you encounter a situation and you're in that moment, you will act properly, showing compassion and proper judgment and stuff. But the minute you think about what you're trying to do, now you're in the past, and you're looking at gain or threat or something like that. So that's the idea that came to mind when I was listening to your talk, is that again, we have to realize we need this identity that we've created to function in the samsaric world, because that's what's there. But it's not what's really there. It's just we can step out of that and be in the moment and be beneficial to ourselves and to those around us. And again, like I say, be here now, be in the moment, and there's no problem. How many times have I said that since I've joined the Zendo?
Thank you again. Thank you again, Mike. Anybody else? Yes, Heckmont.
Thank you for the talk, Peter. It made me think a little bit about that distinction between like sudden versus like gradual enlightenment, right? I know there's like perhaps a big debate, but also not wanting to get too caught up in that, because it sounds like it's a little bit of both, right? Like it's like a lifetime practice, but even if there are those virtual moments, like not wanting that stink to carry over, like you said. So that's just what it made me think of. Maybe it's a little bit of both, and yeah, so that's just some thoughts I had.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, if there's ultimately no trace of enlightenment remains, why it has nothing to do with sudden enlightenment and gradual enlightenment. In all cases, whether you stressed early in your practice sudden enlightenment, or you stressed just sitting in a practice, like Soto Zen does, the result ends up being the same. And it's also the same in other forms of Buddhism as well, not just Zen Buddhism. So,
It's kind of a moot point, I guess, in a way, right?
yeah, I read this week Suzuki Roshi saying again that Dogen said that some people will be enlightened and some people won't, but the main point is it doesn't matter, because the end result will be the same. And it really will. It's exactly the same. But there are different ways of doing it, for sure.
Isn't this speaking to what I've heard accounts that Suzuki Roshi never had an enlightenment,
It's
a sudden enlightenment?
well, that's a good point, and I really can't answer the question. I've heard many answers to that question. Well, not
Okay.
several answers to that question. So,
But you speak to it as
but when
very pointedly with what you say.
well, when I read Suzuki Roshi,
Mhm.
as respect to in the past, well, the far past, certainly, I had no idea what he was talking about, really. I thought I did, of course, but I didn't. But
Mhm.
now I can see that there was nothing lacking in his, not that this is not true for me, okay? But there's nothing lacking in Suzuki Roshi's practice that I can see.
He probably just never talked about things like
I
that.
never saw a mistake in what he said. And I'm always surprised at when he's talking, people thought, we thought that we understood Suzuki Roshi, at least to some extent anyway. We were satisfied by his talks. But in fact, when you read him, later on in your practice, he's answering all of those things too. He doesn't. So of course, I'm extremely prejudiced. But anyway, I think he walked the walk. He didn't even talk about his own practice either.
No.
No, he didn't. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you.